Methought I saw how wealthy men did grind the poor men's faces, and greedily did prey on them, not pitying their cases. It is a proverb old and true that weakest go to the wall. Rich men can drink till the sky look blue, but poor men pay for all. Rich people invented homeless people in the 16th century, and they've been mad about it ever since. Okay, that's not quite true, but before the 1500s, people weren't really afraid of homeless people like we are now. A homeless person gets on the tube and everyone tries desperately to avoid eye contact, even more than normal. I've done it. If you're homeless, people suddenly feel free to make all sorts of assumptions about what you spend money on and what drugs you do and what crimes you commit. But it's not always been like that. For a medieval person, living in poverty is holy. That's what Jesus asked us to do. Matthew 19:21, Jesus said unto him, If thou wilt be perfect, go and sell that thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven. St. Francis of Assisi actually did it, the mad bastard, and lived as a beggar, just straight up asking people for what he needed. When you become a monk or a nun, you take a vow of poverty and you give up your possessions. Some monks were beggars on purpose. They were called mendicant friars, and they lived off donations. So, to a medieval person, the reason you're not a beggar isn't because you work hard and spend your money wisely and don't do drugs. It's the same reason you're not a monk. That sounds hard, and God didn't call me to do that. When a lord's household has a meal, it is normal for his servants to distribute leftovers to the poor. If a disabled person comes round to your house, it is normal to offer them something to eat and a dry place to kip if you have it. By the 1600s, that's all changed. Society is terrorised by the spectre of the unemployed poor. Kings come up with new kinds of prisons, people are being burned through the ear with hot irons, and by 1600 it is illegal to be homeless. Our text for today is Masterless Men by A.L. Beier. Wait, Ale Beier? But you'll find a complete list of sources in the description. It takes me ages to read all this stuff and add my little citations in the corner and write up the source list for the description. So if you read a single book from my sources, I love you. Please don't make me have done it for nothing. Let's talk about not having a job. Why are there unemployed people anyway? These days, it's normal to have a certain section of the population be unemployed, even when they're willing and able to work. But that wasn't always so. World War II, we had pretty much full employment. Obviously, there's always been people who don't work, either because they're disabled, or they're babies, or they're rich. But medieval people don't really talk about unemployment like we do. So if your soul got sucked into the body of a random English person in medieval times, 80% chance you'd be what we now call a peasant, a farmer who either owns a small farm or no farm at all. About half of all peasants are freemen, and half are what we call serfs. Serfs own nothing but their own bellies. You're considered part of the land that you live on, like the trees. The lord who owns the land will rent you a patch to farm to make your own food, but you'll also have to work on his farm a certain number of days a week. You shear his sheep, harvest his corn, dig his ditches. He's not doing that himself, is he? You're not allowed to leave, and he gets to decide if you're allowed to get married. Some people have compared it to slavery, and I have a couple of things to say about that. So I think if this happened to someone today, we probably would call it that, or at least like enforced labour or something. But people in the 1300s already have the word slave, and they don't use it to describe serfs. So if you're talking to a historian, they're genuinely not going to understand who you're talking about. It would be very imprecise to do that. A serf owns nothing but his belly. A slave doesn't even own his own belly. Like, if you're a slave, your master can just murder you for no reason. You get legal punishments that are different to serfs. If you're a slave, they can sell you away from your family or force you to move, whereas a serf is part of the land, so they can't do that. But all that arguing about the exact definition of slavery versus serfdom is moot, because if someone's saying to you, English people were enslaved as serfs, they're tricking you into having an argument about definitions when what they actually mean is, we don't have to care about black people being enslaved because white people were enslaved too. They are so desperate to find an excuse not to care about black people. We're not doing that here. Even if English serfs were treated the exact same as enslaved Africans in the transatlantic slave trade, it doesn't mean that the transatlantic slave trade would have been fine, actually. For this video, I read a lot about white people doing enforced labour and being indentured into servitude and being labour trafficked, and it only gave me more solidarity with all the people throughout history who've been treated like this. Black and white, unite and fight. Okay, so, being a serf is terrible, but it's also a little bit of a safety net. Most freemen aren't rich. One study found that the average serf actually rents a bigger farm than the average freeman. And if there's a famine on, it might be better to be a serf than to be free, because your lord doesn't want you to starve if you're going to be working on his farm, so he might hand out bread or sell you bread that's not too price gougy. In fact, when times are hard, people actually sell themselves and their families into serfdom to avoid starvation. And under this system, there isn't a lot of what we would call unemployment. Like, what would it mean for a serf to be unemployed? There are people who can't work because of their age or disability, but if you're born into a serf family, it's not like you're being turned down for job interviews, right? So this system of serfs and lords is called the manorial system because the lord lived on the manor. And in the 14th century, it starts to break down. In 1348, the great pandemic, known as the Black Death, sweeps through the country and kills so many people that crops are mouldering in the fields and cows are dropping dead because nobody is looking after them. Every lord is desperate for workers to bring his harvest in, and there aren't enough people to do it all. So, maybe the lord the next village over offers you more money to go and work for him. Like, yeah, you're bound to the land, so it is technically illegal to move, but what's your lord gonna do about it? He can't stop everyone. Maybe, if he wants to bring in his harvest this year, he's gonna have to sweeten the deal for you. Wages for what we'd now call unskilled male workers shoots up to what will be their highest level in real terms until 1850. People start moving around to different villages to find work, and so you're no longer bound to the land anymore. By 1500, serfdom is almost completely gone. So the next time there's a bust in the economy, that safety net is no longer in place. I'm not saying serfdom is a good safety net. Almost any safety net is better. But in the 1500s, there's no safety net at all. If you move to a new village to get away from your lord, yeah, maybe the wages are higher, but you don't have any land there, so you'd better hope wages stay high. In the 1530s, another safety net is cut. Monks and nuns used to do a lot of social work, feeding the poor, caring for the sick, teaching children. They ran most of the country's schools and hospitals, and there weren't many of those places. They weren't good by modern standards, but in the 1530s, Henry VIII dissolves all the monasteries. It's always Henry VIII's fault, And now, no one is doing that work. In the first half of the 16th century, wages fall in real terms by as much as 50%. By 1600, you can't make a profit out of a farm less than 30 acres anymore. So all the small farmers sell up to the big landowners. Without a farm to live off, the only other option left is wage labour. And a lot of this labour is paid by the day, so it isn't exactly stable. According to Beier, wage labour was synonymous with poverty. Unemployed people are much more noticeable in towns, like London, and London is getting bigger. Between 1550 and 1650, the population trebles. People from all over the country are coming to London for work, especially because in London, then as now, you get paid the London waiting. There's loads of ships coming in, so maybe you can get work on the docks. There's loads of craft guilds, so maybe you can get an apprenticeship as a tailor or a shoemaker. They think that here in the country it was very hard and miserable living, but a woman having good apparel might live with great pleasure in London. Also, other cities sometimes just ship their poor to us, assuming that there'll be work for them here. There aren't enough houses for all these people, and there aren't enough jobs. In Westminster, there are people literally dying on the steps of the Houses of Parliament. The Privy Council itself notices persons that do keep evil rule and harbour thieves, rogues and vagabonds in places like Shoreditch and Clerkenwell. There are free-roaming gangs of children in the streets, throwing stones at windows, stealing from shops, hitting horses. People are just being found dead in the street with no known family. When this happens, they end up in records since it's the local government who is the one who has to pay for their burial. So you get lists of the dead, like Edward Ellis, a vagrant who died in the street. A young man not known who died in a hayloft. A cripple that died in the street before John Austen's door. A poor woman, being vagrant, whose name was not known. She died in the street under the seat before Mr. Christian Shipman's house, called the Crown, in the High Street. At the time, all these people are referred to with terms like vagrants. Now, these aren't all homeless people in the sense that we'd think of a homeless person now. A lot of them are more like the unemployed people you see in photos of the Great Depression in America, like men looking for work but unable to find it. Like, maybe you're a carpenter and you hear that St. Paul's is looking for woodworkers, so you leave your house and you head to London, but the job is a bust for some reason. Like, maybe they've finished, maybe you didn't get paid the full amount, maybe you do get paid the full amount but you get robbed, and now you're stuck in London with no way of getting back home. Maybe you're a soldier who's been left in a foreign part of the country after a war with an injury that means you can't go back to your old work. Maybe you're an actor who travels from place to place doing shows. Roma are arriving in Britain for the first time in this period, and they're counted as vagrants. Some vagrants are servants who've run away from a master that was hitting them, or trying to have sex with them. Some of the most horrific stories of vagrants are those of women who get pregnant out of wedlock and either leave home or are sent away from home in order to have the baby. If you're a servant and the master of the house gets you pregnant, you don't have any job protection when he fires you so that his wife doesn't notice the bump. In 1618, there's a woman from Somerset called Elizabeth Holland who gives birth to a baby in the porch of a church in Wales because she'd been sent out of the way to give birth. The father is her stepfather. People at the time do try and count how many vagrants there are, but they don't do a very good job. There are numbers from the time between 10,000 and 200,000 vagrants. Surveys of the poor in the second half of the 16th century generally put the destitute at somewhere between 20 and 30% of the population. And the wealthy hate this. Not because they think it's inhumane to die unknown in a stranger's doorway, not because they have empathy for the poor, but because they think it's, like, immoral. to be poor. In 1509, Edmund Dudley says that being employed is the very mother of all vice, and the lineal grandam of poverty and misery. They call these people masterless men. It's a mark of how undemocratic society is in the 1500s that not having a master is seen as a bad thing, like a failing on your part. People assume that if you don't have a lord or a master, you must commit crimes. Juan Louis Vive said, "We know not according to what law or by what conventions they live." And so, over the course of the 16th century, they make it illegal to be unemployed. Literally, if the authorities sweep you up and tell you you have to go and work on a farm, you can be imprisoned if you refuse, even if you can't get to that farm, or you can't do that work, or the job pays peanuts, or it's far away from your family. Between 1495 and 1610, there are 13 different laws passed, making vagrancy a crime and outlining different punishments for it. Some authorities start sewing badges on the clothing of vagrants who've been arrested before to mark them out. In 1515, the city of York passes a law saying that if you genuinely can't work, you should wear a badge to distinguish you from those who can. One of the earliest punishments is the stocks, which is when you're locked in a board outside, usually by the legs. From 1495, you can be put in the stocks for 3 days for your first offence and 6 days for a second offence. That's in all weathers, sleeping and waking. From 1531, you can be whipped for vagrancy. They tie you to the back of a cart without your shirt on, and so you have to follow it as it goes round town with someone behind you, whipping you until your back is bloody. From 1572, you can get a hole burned through your ear. This is a red-hot poker, an inch thick, pushed through. They don't go through the lobe, they go through the cartilage bit. After 1604, you might be branded on the left shoulder with an R, so thoroughly burned and set on upon the skin and flesh that the letter R be seen and remain for a perpetual mark upon such a rogue during his or her life. In 1520, the City of London sets up a pillory on the main street, Cheapside, which is like the stocks, but for your hands. We often talk about the pillory as if it was all in good fun and like people would throw rotten tomatoes at you. But this is incorrect. They didn't have tomatoes yet. Also, your ears are nailed to the back. And it's a stress position as well, right? Like you're constantly trying to keep your neck off the board so you don't get choked. So people only get put in the pillory for a matter of hours rather than days. And this is all for a first offence. For your second, you get hanged. But they don't really want to hang you. What they really want is for you to work for free. They want free labour out of you. You're not working? Well, you should be working, whether you get paid for it or not. In 1583, Sir Humphrey Gilbert said that a great number of men which do now live idly at home are burdenous, chargeable, and unprofitable to this realm, shall hereby be set on work. From 1553, you might be sent to Bridewell Prison in London, which is a new prison made out of the bones of an old palace that the king's not using anymore. This isn't like other prisons. Medieval prisons were really just holding pens for people who were waiting for trial. The job of Bridewell is to put you to work, to turn you into a decent citizen. This is the first ever work prison. Now, you're not being sent here as punishment for a crime, but to force you to work, which means you don't need to have been convicted of a crime to be sent to Bridewell. They send orphans to Bridewell. In 1606, a woman called Alice Smalley is sent to Bridewell because she's had a child out of wedlock. It turns out that the father of the child is her boss, so the authorities can't send her back to him, so she ends up in prison instead. Other petty criminals like pickpockets and sex workers get sent there too. There you might be fitted for some kind of heavy shoe or chains so you can't run away. Men have their heads shaved and women are inspected to see if they're virgins or not. you'll be put to work from sunrise to sunset doing things like grinding flour and making rope. If you refuse, your food ration might be cut and you'll be whipped. These are private prisons, so the prison governor will be making money off whatever you make. And other towns copy this model. At the high point, Hertfordshire has 7 bridewells, Sussex has 6, and Devon has 4. So I have a bird feeder just outside the window, and there's this group of starlings that fight each other to get. They do air acrobatics to get onto it, and they're very cute, but it's quite noisy. According to one judge, bridewells are so awful that criminals beg to go to a regular prison instead. There's also not a lot of space in the bridewells, they're never very well funded, and some of them only last a few years. So instead, you might be told, well, we were planning on taking you to court for a hanging offence, but we won't prosecute if you sign up for military service. In some campaigns, there are thousands of vagrants who've basically been forced into military service this way. Now, so far, we've been talking about some things that sound kind of close to slavery, even if they wouldn't have called it that at the time. But in 1547, they actually just make slavery the legal punishment for vagrancy. I'd not heard this before. When I first read this, tucked away in a little article in the Economic History Review from the 60s, I had to go and lie down for a little while. What the fuck? What the fuck? It's so fucked up, man. The King of England signs a law enslaving his own people for being homeless. Technically, this one isn't Henry VIII's fault. It's his son. The way it works is that whoever dobs you into the authorities for being a vagrant is allowed to use you as a slave for 2 years. Think of all the ways that those incentives are messed up. He's allowed to beat you, chain you up, sell you, pass you down in his will. The punishment for running away is lifetime enslavement, and the punishment for running away twice is death. Thankfully, historians have never, as far as I know, found an instance of this actually happening to someone, and the law is only on the books for 2 years, at which point they realise that having such a law on the books is a really good way to get yourself overthrown, so they repeal it. But they do put something on the books that's similar: indentured servitude. From 1597, instead of offering you the choice between hanging and military service, they might instead offer you a choice between hanging and indentured servitude. The way it works is you sign a contract with some guy in a different country or a colony who wants workers. The colonies in what will become the United States are the most common destinations, but people are also sent to Newfoundland, the East Indies, the West Indies, Ireland, and continental Europe. The contract is normally for between 4 and 7 years. That guy pays for your crossing and whatever food, clothing, and shelter you need while you're there. In return, he gets to work you to the bone for those 7 years, or sell the contract to someone else. When your time is up, you get a parcel of land in that country that's yours to farm as you please. The first person we know this happens to is a Londoner. He's an apprenticed dyer who'd run away from his master and stolen some goods on his way out. He's sent to the colony of Virginia in 1607. By the 1620s, hundreds of people are being shipped at a time from all over the country. Because of the promise of land at the end of the contract, as the period goes on, more people start signing up for this voluntarily until volunteers become the majority. But at the beginning, it really is forced labour trafficking. And again, they wouldn't have called it slavery. People who were indentured had the same rights as a free servant, not the rights of an enslaved person, but it's bad, man. The people being sent over like this are generally young and commonly actual children. In 1618, the Virginia Company, who's running the colony in Virginia, approach the City of London and they go, "Hey, you've got all these street kids running around being annoying. What if we took them off your hands. And the City of London is like, wow, that sounds fantastic. Kidnapping orphans off the street, yes, please. They promised to supply the company with 100 children from the age of 8 years old. And they tell their constables to go and sweep up homeless kids or kids who are just outside a lot, being annoying. The city pays for the kids' clothes and transport across to America, and the company gives them the land at the end of their contract. For the vast majority of these kids, that's the last we hear of them in the historical record. The survival rate is extremely low. Thousands are shipped to Virginia from all over the country in the 1620s, but when Virginia does population counts, their numbers have only risen by a few hundred. We don't even know how most of them are dying, whether it's like on the ship or of disease when they get there. We know that a couple of them were killed in an attack by Native Americans, and the City of London is really furious about it. They passed this resolution, like telling off the Virginia company for letting these kids get killed. And then immediately they're like, well, better send the Virginia company 100 more children. Like, it's a real sounds like you're feeding shelter cats to coyotes situation. However, there are a few kids that we know survive and go on to do other things. Nicholas Granger is transported from Bridewell prison when he's 9. He turns up in the records again when he's much older, so presumably he finished his contract, got his land, and by the 1640s, he's rich enough to be importing 7 indentured servants of his own. And of course, this is a London channel, but Irish people are famously forcibly transported this way in huge numbers, with an estimated 50,000 forced into indentured servitude in the 1650s alone. Why do they hate poor people so much? I can't psychoanalyse people who lived 500 years ago, but I wonder if it is redirected guilt. You pass a homeless person on the street and they're clearly miserable and you don't help them. And you feel bad for not helping them, so your brain makes up a story where actually they deserve it, or even where you're the victim. After the 1600s, your tax money is paying benefits to the poor, so that's a nice easy way of setting yourself up as a victim, right? Like, I have to work hard for a living, and these lazy people just coast through life off other people's backs. As the period goes on, people become more radically Protestant. The sociologist Max Weber said that in Protestantism, working hard all the time is seen as virtuous, no matter what that work creates, like just working hard on its own, in a way that it kind of isn't in other religions. So not working hard is kind of a sin all by itself. And yet at the same time, the wealthy don't want you to make something of yourself through hard work. For them, the economy is better if there's lots of really downtrodden poor people who have to work for pennies. Plenty of people must also cause cheapness of wages, which will cause the cheapness of the manufacture. Keeping a huge poor underclass is a good thing because that means I can buy cheap clocks or something. A writer called Bernard Mandevillle really says the quiet part out loud on this one. He would love to enslave the English working class, but since he thinks that's not feasible, the next best thing is just to keep us all really downtrodden so we can't ask for higher wages. In a free nation where slaves are not allowed of, the surest wealth consists in a multitude of laborious poor. You know what, Bernard? If you love people who work hard for no money so much, you have a great opportunity to increase their numbers by 1. And I invite you to think of all the reasons he might not have done that. As the British Empire reaches out its first feeble tendrils to the shores of the Americas, it can't be sustained by gentlemen adventurers alone. The John Smiths and Walter Raleighs of the world aren't going to be caught dead subsistence farming to feed themselves. The empire needs a working class, so the empire creates a working class. The reason I found out about these child shipments to Virginia is because I fell down a rabbit hole while I was researching for my next book, and this is something that keeps happening to me. I was recently looking at portraits of 18th century Londoners, and I was like, hang on, Why are they all doing the Napoleon thing, where they've got their hands in their waistcoats? And within the week, I'd made a second bonus video about why guys used to put their hands in waistcoats in paintings. It features one of my favourite shots I've got all year, and you can watch it right now on Nebula. So Nebula is this streaming service for some of my favourite video makers. Jacob Geller and Big Joel and Lindsay Ellis are on there, and we make stuff that you can't see anywhere else, or that gets released there a long time before you can see it anywhere else. It's really well curated, so it's much easier to find new, thoughtful creators as well. Because of Nebula, I found Lily Alexander, who's been making beautiful videos for years that I never knew about until I found her on Nebula. When I saw this shot of her remaking early movies from Etienne Jules Marais, I gasped out loud. There are no adverts on Nebula, no stupid pop-ups covering up part of my video, no interruptions from Gala Bingo. If you use my link in the description, you get it for 50% off as well, which is £30 a year, which is way less than other streaming sites. And you can get a free trial for 3 days. And my Hands in Waistcoat video is much shorter than 3 days, so you could probably watch it a few times. And look, it's winter. This is a video about homeless people. I want to have a fundraiser on it for a homeless charity. Normally that would be like Shelter or St Mungo's, but YouTube has quite a small list of charities that it will let you put on there. It has to be a US charity, and it seems like not even all of them. So I'm going to find the homelessness charity with the highest Charity Navigator score on here that I can, and I will chip in a chunk of change at the beginning. If we can get someone off the streets for a night, then that's a good thing, no matter which side of the Atlantic they're on.